Last week, we began a study of Bible patterns. And we're asking the question, is the Bible a book of patterns, a model, a design, a blueprint on how God wants us to conduct our worship and work and service to Him that we give Him in this life? Is the Bible a book of patterns? And last week we set the foundation for this study by defining what a pattern is, and we discussed some very basic principles in understanding the need to follow God's instruction. We ended up last week by looking at this passage. Jesus, talking to the Jews of His day, when He was on the earth, He said, "Not everyone that saith to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven." And therefore we submit to you that if I want to please God, if my aim and my purpose is to please God, then I must do the will of the Father that sent Him here. And you and I cannot know His will unless we look in the Scripture. That is where His will is found. That is where that answer to the question of what the Father's will is, that's where the answer can be found. Now in that word and in that will, there are Bible blueprints. There are designs, there are patterns. And the question you and I must ask is, through biblical history and through the teaching of the Old into the New, has God given patterns? And when He did, what did He expect to happen? And what did He require of mankind? Now this morning we're going to begin looking at some of the patterns that God gave in the Old Testament. And we're going to begin in the days of Noah. Is there such a thing as a Bible pattern? Now in Genesis chapter 6, God looked down upon the world and He saw that man's heart was evil continually. And it repented Him that He had made man. And so He determined that He was going to destroy every living creature on earth and all that He had created, and He was going to start anew. But the Bible says in Genesis 6:8 that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And so He gave Moses some instruction. And He gave Moses an instruction concerning the ark. In Genesis 6, verse 14 and 15, the Bible says, "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and outside with pitch, and this is how you shall make it." And if you continue reading after verse 15 down to verse 21, God gave Noah the dimensions, the length, the width, the height, how many doors, how many windows, what to put in it, how many stories it was to have, what kind of material that it was to be made out of, and to be constructed. Now, Genesis 6:22 says, "Thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he." Now, what did Moses do? Moses built the tabernacle. Noah built the ark. Noah built the ark according to God's specifications. He made it out of gopher wood. He made it exactly the length that God told him, 450 cubic feet, 450 inches long. He told him how wide to make it, how high to make it. He told him to put one door in it, one window. Told him how many stories he wanted in it. Told him what to take in it. Again, God gave all those details. He gave all those specifications to Noah. What did Noah do? Noah followed His instruction. And when the floods came, when the waters of the deep were broken underneath the earth, and when the windows of heaven were opened, and the water came from above, and the water began to cover the whole earth to the highest mountain, what happened to the ark? It raised above the water, raised it off the earth, and it floated, and it saved Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives, and every living thing that was in the ark, and everything outside died. Now, question. Did God give Noah a pattern? Did He give him a blueprint? Did He give him a design and a model to follow in order to save him and his house? Did He? Was the ark a blueprint? Was it a pattern? And did Noah have to follow it? Yes. And that's why Noah was saved, because he did all that God commanded him. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is a Bible pattern. Now, we don't have to build an ark, because God hasn't instructed us to build an ark. But there was a time when he instructed one of his children to build an ark to save that family in order to preserve life. God gave a Bible pattern. And Noah was saved because he followed those instructions. Now remember what I told you at the close of last week's lesson. There are those who say that we're just hung up on the details. Really? God doesn't care about the details? If he doesn't care about the details, ladies and gentlemen, why did he give those instructions to Noah? Why did he give that divine blueprint of that ark if he doesn't care? Why did he just leave it up to Noah to build whatever he wanted and God would have saved him? Why did he do that? Because God gave a pattern he intended to be followed. Next, what about the tabernacle? Is there such a thing as a Bible pattern? Moses had given the pattern of the tabernacle in Exodus 25, verse 8 and 9. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them, according to all that I show you that is in the pattern of the tabernacle, and the pattern of all of its furnishing, just so you shall make it. Notice, that is the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all of its furnishing. Who served the copy in the shadow of the heavenly things, as Moses was divinely instructed when he was about to make the tabernacle, for he said, see that you make all things according to the pattern showed to you on the mount. When he was up on Mount Sinai, he got the blueprint, he got the model, he got the design, he got the divine instructions on how to construct the sanctuary of the tabernacle. The place where God would symbolically dwell with them, the place where his name would be, and the place where they would come to worship God. That was God's divine pattern. And remember, many of our listeners today would have you believe that you can change God's pattern. That God doesn't care about those little details. Really? Anybody that takes that argument has never studied the Old Testament. When you talk about the tabernacle, how detailed was God? God was detailed not only about how the tabernacle was to be constructed. He told them what material to make it out of. He told them about all the furnishings, the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the lampstand, the bronze laver, the altars where the sacrifices. He told them what they were to make them out of them. He even told them where to place them in the tabernacle. And then they had a holy place and a most holy place. And he showed them where he wanted that. And then even the curtains that separated the holy place from the most holy place was made out of a certain type of thread, a certain type of material. And when it was transported, it was to be transported by a certain way where none of the furnishings would be touched. They would have rings on the corners of the furnishings and poles, acacia poles that would go on the ends of them, and they would be hand carried so nobody had to touch them. And he even told them how to pack it up. And then he told them how to reconstruct it when they stopped after they moved and how it was to be reconstructed. Did God have a pattern? Is that a Bible pattern? And when that tabernacle was dedicated in Exodus chapter 40, when it was dedicated after it was constructed, and the glory of the Lord overshadowed it, and no one could enter it because the glory of the Lord covered the tabernacle, and symbolically he was taking up residence so he would be their God and they would be his people. Why did he do that? Because they followed the pattern. They followed the blueprint. They built it exactly like God told them to build it. But yet we have people tell us today that the Bible is not a book of patterns. That man is at liberty to change and to alter. Then why didn't Noah change the ark? Why didn't Moses change the tabernacle? Why did that not happen? Because God chose men who were faithful and would trust in him and would follow the instructions, and they were given blueprints, and each man, Noah in the case of the ark, Moses in the case of the tabernacle, the children of Israel, they followed those instructions to the detail. Why? Because they loved God, they wanted to please God, and they wanted God's blessing. And therefore, they adhered to the pattern and the blueprint and the model and the design that God gave them. Read your Bible. Those people that tell you the Bible does not have patterns, and that God doesn't care about the detail, ask him about the ark. Ask him about the tabernacle. What about the temple? What about the temple in Solomon's day, the more permanent structure? Then David gave his son Solomon the plans for the vestibule, its houses, its treasuries, its upper chambers, its inner chambers, and the place of the mercy seat, and the plan for all that he had by the Spirit of the courts of the house of the Lord, and all of the chambers all around, of the treasuries of the house of God, and of the treasuries for the dedicated things, also for the division of the priests and the Levites, for all the work of the service of the house of the Lord, and for all the articles of service in the house of the Lord. Where did David get all that? Where did David get all those plans, all those details? Where did he get them? He got them from God. And then he gave them to his son Solomon, who was going to construct the temple. And when Solomon constructed the temple, he followed the blueprint that was given by God to David, that David gave to him, and he built the temple according to the blueprint and the pattern and the plans that were given to him by his father, that were given to David by God. Now again, when that temple was dedicated in the days of Solomon, the glory of the Lord overshadowed the temple, and they could not go in because of the glory of the Lord. And again, he symbolically was allowing his name to be put there, that he symbolically was dwelling with them. But the reason he did is because Solomon followed the instruction, and the people that constructed the temple, they followed the instruction exactly according to the plans that God gave to his servant David, and David gave to Solomon his son. And they followed those instructions to the letter. So, ladies and gentlemen, in the days of Noah, in the days of Moses and the tabernacle, and the days of the temple in Solomon, go and read the instruction. Go and read Exodus 35, 25 through 40 about the tabernacle. Go and read in 1 Kings about the construction of the temple. Go and read it. Look at all the detail, down to the thread, the type of material, how to be transported, where to put it, where it was to be laid, who was to minister, and what they were to do. The different families within the Levites. There were 3 major families in the Levites, and each of them had particular responsibilities according to, about the temple, and each of them had a particular thing that they had to do, just like in the days of the tabernacle, that each of the families had certain responsibilities. The Levites had the responsibility of the service of the temple and the tabernacle, and they were told what kind of clothes they were to wear. They were told what to do with each sacrifice. They were told how to present it. They were told what animal it was to be, what type of animal. It had to be without spot, it had to be without blemish. The first fruits, gave them feast days that they had to keep, that all the Jews, there were 3 feast days that they had to keep in order to come to Jerusalem. All of those things were stipulated by God's instruction. Those are patterns, they're models, they're blueprints. And when God gave the blueprint of the ark to Noah, when he gave the blueprint of the tabernacle to Moses, when he gave the blueprint of the temple to Solomon, what did he intend for those men to do? To follow those instructions. The question you and I must ask, were those patterns? Were they models? Were they divine design? Were they a blueprint? And why did God bless those 3 men? Because they acted according to the pattern. Question you need to consider. What if they had altered, changed, or amended, or disregarded God's instruction? What would have happened? Men today say you can. If you can, and we have the liberty to do it, why didn't Noah do it? Why didn't Moses do it? Why didn't Solomon do it? If those are just suggestions, if those are just things that we can go by, we can accept them, or we can alter and amend them, why didn't those men do that? Because they didn't have the authority to do that. And because they were seeking God's approval. They were seeking God's blessing. And the only way they could receive it was following those instructions. Those were divine patterns. Patterns that God gave and intended to be followed. Israel followed the works of their own hands. Now, let me give you some instruction and some information about what happened when they decided to do their own thing. Israel decided to follow their own patterns instead of God's. What happened? Now, there was a time when God gave instructions about patterns that Israel just disregarded. They just didn't think it was important, and they did something different. But when they did that, what was the outcome? We know what the outcome was with Noah and the ark. We know what the outcome was with Moses and the tabernacle. And we know what the outcome was with Solomon and the temple. So we know what happened when men followed God's instruction. When they followed the divine pattern and the blueprint, we know what transpired. Now, what happens when men go and make their own pattern? And they go aside from God's instruction. And they do their own thing. How does that work out? Well, let's see how that works out. And they made a calf in those days, offered sacrifices to the idol, and rejoiced in the work of their own hand. This was in Exodus 32, when they offered the golden calf, while Moses was up receiving the law, and also receiving the pattern of the tabernacle. And when he did, they made a golden calf. Now, it was strictly forbidden that they follow idolatry. Go back and read Exodus chapter 20. In the Ten Commandments, they were not to make graven images. They were not to bow down to them. But they determined to change that pattern and made a golden calf. How did that work out? What happened to them? What happened to them? What happened when they made this golden calf? Moses came down off the mountain in Exodus 32. He broke the tablets. He crushed them. And then he took the golden calf and he grinded it into powder and he threw it in the water and then he made him drink the water. Then he sent the Levites through the calves and thousands of them lost their lives. Why? Because they violated God's pattern. The golden calf. Why wasn't it just as good as the tabernacle? Why wasn't it just as good as the altar that they offered sacrifices on? Remember, these are the gods that led you out of Egypt. That's what Israel wanted, and that's what Aaron made for them. And God rejected that. And many of them lost their lives because of that. And God's displeasure was, he was angry, he was furious. And he told Moses to get down there, for their heart had gone astray already. But if man can change God's pattern, if they can change what he says, if they can change an altar, and they don't have to follow, they don't have to do it that way. They don't have to adhere to the blueprint. They don't have to adhere to the model. And if man's ways are just as good as God, why didn't it work out that way? Why? Why did Moses take such action? Because it was sin. God said it was sin because they had violated his pattern. They had violated his law. Therefore, that means that they sinned. But men tell us today we can change and we can do our own patterns. We can do our own pasting. We can do our own, finagling. And we can alter this and change this and amend that to make it more palatable to others. We can do that. That's what men tell us. But why didn't it not work out that way when men did that, as we have example in the Old Testament? What happens when men change God's pattern? Well, in Exodus 32 it didn't go very well, did it? Well, let me give you another one. What about Nadab and Abihu? Now I want you to consider this. Nadab and Abihu were priests. They were Levites. They were Aaron's sons. They were part of the priesthood. And this is after their consecration. After they had been consecrated for the work as a priest. And they've been given the priestly garments. And this is the first time in Leviticus 10 that someone other than Moses and Aaron are going to offer sacrifice and service to God in the capacity of a priest. And this is after they've been sanctified and they've been consecrated and their garments have been consecrated and sanctified, and now they're offering worship to God as God's priest in the tabernacle for the very first time. What happened in Leviticus 10? Then Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it, put incense on it, and will offer profane fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. So fire went out from the Lord, and he devoured them, and they died before the Lord. Notice what happened. They offered profane fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. They got the fire from another source. Where did they get it from? It doesn't matter. Whatever source they got it from was not the one that was prescribed by God. It was not by the coal on the altar where it was to be burning continually. They didn't get the fire there. They got it from some other source. But what difference does it make? Fire is fire. It really doesn't matter. That's a trivial thing. Really? Is it trivial? God sent fire down from heaven and they devoured them and they died right there. Why? Why? That's a trivial thing. That's a small thing. No. You know why God took their life? Because he said, I'm the Lord, and those who come before me to serve me must consider me to be holy. They must respect him. And respecting him means that you follow his instruction. You do it the way that he told you to do it. And they did not treat him as holy. They treated him contemptibly. Why? Because they changed his pattern. And God made a statement. In the very first time that men came in the capacity of his house to offer him service, God made an emphatic statement that you are not authorized and you should never take it upon yourself to try to alter, change, or amend any pattern that I have given you. Those patterns were given by God himself. They did not have the authority or the right to change, to alter, or to amend. And when they did, it had disastrous consequences. And so here we are. We've showed you 3 examples where God gave examples to Noah, to Moses, and to Solomon, and they followed them. And then we see that when they made the golden calf and despised God's pattern of worship, and then when they didn't offer the worship according to the priest as they were directed to, that God took their life. So we see 2 examples where men changed the pattern, where they altered, where they disregarded it. And in both cases, it turned out in disaster. What do men say today? Oh, God doesn't care about the detail. We don't have to do it that way. We're at liberty to change it or amend it to make it more convenient to people today and make it more relevant in our day and time. We have the right to do that. Really? Where are you going to go to prove that? What scripture are you going to come up with, and what example do you want to come up with that man ever did that and it worked out for him? Look at the Bible, ladies and gentlemen. Use your head. Look at it. Examine it. Look at what happened when they followed the pattern, and look at what happened when they didn't. There are 2 distinct conclusions. All you have to do is be honest and look and examine. King Saul and the Amalekites. This will be the last one for today. Saul, as king, the first king in the United Kingdom, chosen by God, was told to go and destroy Amalek, to destroy everything that drew the breath of life. Every man, woman, child, every animal, he was to leave nothing alive. God was punishing Amalek for the time and the injustice that they had done towards his people, that God had not forgotten that, and now God is punishing them for their sin and for their treatment of his people, and he tells his king, appointed by him, to go and destroy everything that Amalek had. What did King Saul do? He also took Agag the king and of the Amalekites alive, and only destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword, but Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the oxen and the fatling and the lambs that were all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy them, but everything else he despised and was worthless, that he utterly destroyed. What did he do? Did he do God's commandment? Well, let's listen to Samuel's own words. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, when Samuel comes up the hill after the battle against the Amalekites is over, listen to what Saul said. And then Samuel went down to Saul, and Saul said to him, "Blessed are you of the Lord, I have performed the commandment of the Lord." He says, "Samuel, I've done what God said. I've destroyed Amalek." Listen to what Samuel said. Then Samuel said, what then is the bleating of the sheep in my ear, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? And Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said to you, be quiet, and I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night. And he said to him, speak on. You see, the instruction was too simple not to understand. God said to destroy everything and do the breath of life. That's not what Saul did. He kept the best of the animals. He kept the king. That's not what God told him. He didn't follow God's instruction. He didn't follow the pattern of the battle that God had given him. What happened because of that? Saul lost his kingdom. He was rejected as being king. And God would soon give the kingdom over to David. He lost the kingdom. Why? Because he didn't follow the pattern. He kept the king alive. He kept the best of it. And then he was going to do that which was wrong. Keeping the animals wrong. And then he was going to offer them a sacrifice like he could undo the wrong by doing what he thought in his mind was right. God did not accept that reasoning. Read 1 Samuel 15, 22, 23. He said, is it better to sacrifice than to be obedient to God? He said that was rebellion. He called what Saul did rebellion. Why? Because he didn't follow the instruction. He didn't follow the prescription and the pattern that God gave him in his destruction on the Amalekites. And because of that, he lost his kingdom. He lost favor with God. So in review this morning, we looked at 3 Bible patterns: the ark in Noah's day, the tabernacle in Moses' day, and the temple in Solomon's day. We saw 3 different Bible patterns that were followed explicitly as God gave the instruction, and each of them found favor and were blessed by God. And then we looked at 3 other examples. The golden calf in Exodus 32. We looked at the false worship of Nadab and Abihu with the strange fire in Leviticus 10. And now we're looking at Saul in his destruction of Amalek. And each of them changed God's pattern. Now, let me ask you a question in closing this morning. Who did God bless? And who did he reject? You know what? I know you know the answer to that. Those who followed the pattern, those who were faithful to that blueprint and design, in the days of Noah, in the days of Moses, in the days of Solomon, they were blessed. They were accepted by God. When Nadab and Abihu and the Israelites and Saul disobeyed God, they were rejected. Now, does that tell you anything, ladies and gentlemen? Does that tell you anything about what God thinks about patterns? What he thinks about models? What he thinks about design and blueprints? And does it tell you what he'll do when men alter, change, and amend what instruction he's given? Now, maybe you're thinking, as we close, that these are just isolated incidents. No, ladies and gentlemen, not isolated incidents. The Bible in the Old Testament is full of them, and we're going to see the same thing in the New. And so as we close this morning, you need to ask yourself, remember the question we began this study with. Is the Bible a pattern? Is it a model? Is it a blueprint? And if it is, can men change it, alter it, and amend it, or reject it, and still come up with the same result of being pleasing to God? I submit to you that honestly, you know the answer to those questions.